For most of the last century, the world felt, well, relatively stable. Tense at times, for sure, but stable. But something's changed, hasn't it? That feeling seems to be gone. There's this growing unease, and suddenly, talk of a major global conflict, something that used to be unthinkable, is now everywhere.
I mean, just listen to that. When the person in charge of NATO, the most powerful military alliance in history, says something that chilling, you have to stop and pay attention. This isn't just talk. It's a warning sign of a really serious shift in how the world works.
And that really brings us to the core question of this entire explainer. Are we actually closer to a full-blown global war than at any point since the Cuban Missile Crisis? To even begin to answer that, we've got to look at how the world itself has been fundamentally rewired.
Okay, so the foundation that's held everything together for decades, it's cracking. The whole system that kept the major powers from going head-to-head is getting weaker. And honestly, what comes next is pretty dangerously uncertain.
See, after World War II, the United States basically built this system of alliances and institutions. Think NATO, the UN, that kind of thing. And whether you loved it or hated it, that order created a set of rules that, for the most part, prevented massive wars between the big players. This timeline really shows you that shift perfectly. You go from that post-war order to what they call the unipolar moment after the Soviet Union collapsed, when the US was really the only superpower left standing. But now we're in this messy, chaotic realignment where it's not just one or two powers, but several, all fighting for their spot at the top.
And with all these powers scrambling for position, we're seeing the return of a very old and frankly very dangerous idea, spheres of influence. It's like we're rewinding the clock back to the Cold War where big countries draw lines on a map and say, "This is my backyard, don't mess with it."
And you can see it right here. The world is splitting into teams. On one side, you have the US and its longtime allies. And on the other, you've got this group of challengers, China, Russia, Iran, and others, who feel the old rules don't work for them and they want to write new ones. The world isn't really global anymore. It's becoming fractured. So if the world is breaking up into these rival camps, where could the first spark really ignite a global fire? Well, analysts are laser-focused on two key areas where one wrong move, one miscalculation, could lead to absolute catastrophe. The first one, and probably the one that keeps most generals up at night, is the Indo-Pacific. And right at the center of it all is one tiny island that could very well decide the future of this century. So for Beijing, Taiwan isn't a separate country. It's a breakaway province, a piece of unfinished history they're determined to reclaim. But for Washington, it's a democratic partner and a vital link in its entire defense strategy for Asia. Some war games, like the one outlined here for 2026, show a Chinese invasion kicking off with massive missile strikes to take U.S. bases out of the fight early. The global impact? It would be instant. We're talking about the collapse of supply chains and a direct hot war between the world's two biggest military powers. And that's not just some hot take from a fringe blog. That's a serious analysis from a major newspaper, and it reflects just how high the stakes have gotten, with military drills and close calls happening there all the time.
All right, let's pivot now to the second major theater, a place where the ghosts of the Cold War have come roaring back to life: Europe.
From Moscow's point of view, NATO's expansion right up to its borders is a direct threat to its existence, and Putin has been very clear that he's prepared for a much bigger war if he feels he's been pushed too far. The real hotspots are what they call NATO's pinch points, especially the small Baltic states on Russia's border. And Moscow is constantly poking and prodding, testing NATO's defenses with everything from cyber attacks to flying jets into their airspace.
But here's the thing. A World War III today wouldn't look anything like the last one. This wouldn't be your grandfather's war. The battlefields wouldn't just be on land, sea, or in the air. The fighting would happen in domains we can't even see.
So the crazy part is that a war could start without anyone even realizing it. It might begin with cyber attacks, shutting down power grids and financial systems. Then it can move to space, with satellites being jammed or destroyed, essentially blinding an entire military by knocking out its GPS and communications. All while economic weapons, sanctions, blockades, are used to strangle a country's economy. By the time most of us knew we were in a war, the first and maybe most decisive battles would have already been fought. In all of this, it leads us to the most terrifying part of this whole new global landscape, the return of the nuclear threat. For decades, it felt like a nightmare we'd left behind in the 20th century, but it's back.
For more than half a century, we've had these crucial guardrails in place, treaties like this one, New START. They were the rulebooks.
They kept things transparent and put a cap on the absolute madness of an all-out nuclear arms race between the US and Russia. But that last guardrail, it's about to vanish. Mark this date on your calendar, February 5th, 2026. That's the day the New START Treaty expires. And as of right now, there's absolutely nothing to replace it. Just let that sink in for a minute. For the first time in over 50 years, no limits, no inspections, no one checking anyone's work. We are flying blind into a situation we haven't seen in half a century, and we're doing it when tensions are arguably higher than ever.
And this chart just shows you the insane scale of what we're dealing with. The US and Russia together control almost 90% of the world's nukes. And then you have China, whose arsenal is smaller, but it's growing incredibly fast, which just adds a whole new, unpredictable element to this dangerous mix.
So this brings us to the most chilling question of all. In this new world without rules, without trust, what's the biggest danger? It might not be someone deciding to start a nuclear war. It might be a catastrophic mistake. A false blip on a radar screen, a hacked warning system, a single misunderstanding in the middle of a crisis that spirals completely out of control. So, is World War III inevitable? The uncomfortable truth is, no, it's not written in the stars. But it is becoming more and more possible, because all the ingredients are there. The big power rivalries, the growing fear, the collapse of diplomacy. The future isn't set in stone, but it is being drafted, right now, by the choices that are being made every single day.